stories all day. I think we only have one more, but I need to remind everyone that there is a dance party after this. Right across the street, a Pride Anthems dance party. So please grab your door cuffs and head over there at the conclusion of this Madeira Stories Live. But the next speaker, the title is Where Everyone Knows My Name. And so I'm very happy to introduce Jake Stallworth as our next speaker.
I come with props. You think if you hadn't figured out, I'm an educator. So I have to have all the things in order to go through and make sure this works. And then because I'm an educator, composition book, change of glasses. All right. If that was not enough, I was open by saying, I'm not gay, but my boyfriend is. So, but at this moment, and those who know the story, I literally left him in Louisville to come here because this moment is important. His birthday is tomorrow, and so we actually had a weekend, and I had to tell him, I'm leaving in the middle of your birthday weekend to come and give a speech, and then driving back here. He didn't speak to me. He hung up the phone, and then next day he called me and said, I'm okay with this because I know that this is important. So that shows how much I love him and I love this place. And I think that that connection goes through. But you also have to take into account that I'm also an outsider. I don't live in Madeira. And so when you say that, my family does. And I think that that's a connection because my brother and sister-in-law live in Madeira, which therefore means that my niece and nephew live in Madeira, and they graduated from Madeira High School. And I'm happy to say that I have many friends here that I talk to, drink with, and I think that that's one of the things that really does carry this. My outsider status goes further than even that. So I heard that there are people from Pleasant Ridge talking about Madeira. I teach in a school district right around here. We'll kind of leave it unnamed for the moment. And even before that, I actually went to boarding school. So when you hear that typical story of where did you go to school, and everyone knows they're truly talking about which high school, which they only do in Ohio and only in Cincinnati, I literally have to say I went out of state to school. And that really flummoxes so many people in terms of not knowing what to do with me. But at that point, I had to notice that I went as a teenager from this area, Kennedy Heights, Pleasant Ridge, Madeira, going up to a boarding school at the age of 14 in the late 80s. I was literally alone. I didn't know what or who I was. And so I'm trying to find my own identity in that group. And now, in many cases, this is before being gay was safe or even allowed. And so I'm figuring that out myself, and I really had to learn. Let's add to that that my mother and my stepfather is a Southern Baptist minister. So now we add to that, and we add to the fact of faith. And so if you hadn't figured out also, as I said, I'm an educator. I'm a big old nerd and have these massive tattoos that are actually mathematical in nature. You can follow me afterwards. I can explain what they all mean. And so that's one of the things that I go through. And the obvious one is I happen to be African American. And one of the reasons, yes, I will put my boots on the ground. And I brought this because this is a stole that, as I found my faith through my story representing my own identity, one of my friends who is a United Methodist pastor, even though I know these two United Methodist pastors, he gave this to me from a conference where David actually spoke and said, I appreciate you being you in this moment, in this place. And as a lay speaker, and I actually do speak in my church and have offered sermons and serve as a liturgist, I go through and bring that message to church being authentically myself. And that's one of the things that I'm proud of in terms of my own identity. But now this is all the context to bring us to where Madeira fits into the story. So, as you know, and again, I lean back into the fact where I say that I'm an educator. And so the the major rule of an educator, and when I say educator, let's just not beat around the bush. I'm an assistant principal. I am not the person that anyone likes. And so many times everyone, including myself, needs space from the issues of the day. And a lot of times for me to find that space, it is for me to get outside of the district that I serve in, but it's also, I need to make sure that I don't carry it home with me because I have to let it go somewhere. And so as I find myself and I become myself, one of the things that I would do is driving from the school district that I worked in, I would stop in Madeira where my niece and nephew are growing up. I would go to basketball games, softball games. I would actually start tutoring other kids in math in the library. And more importantly, one of the things that I would do is I would attend all of the choir concerts, all of the holiday programs, all of the things that you see there. But that was a place where I started and I began to feel connected. And I began to see that this place was one place in the center of all of in the center of all my travels that really became a center of my story and allowed me to go through and be myself and be comfortable. And you wouldn't expect this little black, gay, African American kid feeling comfortable here in Madeira. And that would be actually at a bar just right over there at like the Madeira Inn. My sister-in-law, my niece have served as bartenders, and occasionally I actually go through and I host trivia. I'm currently working on a dissertation. That's why you haven't seen me lately. So let's add to that, please. But many a day, I would sit at a table in the bar working. I would just sit there with my laptop, grading papers, working on teacher evaluations, doing all the things I need to, but just sitting there being authentically myself. And a lot of times people in the bar would sit and look and sit and look. And then over time, they sat, they got closer, and they began talking. They sat, they got closer and began asking questions. They sat with me, talked to me, and listened to my story. And I think that that's one of the things that became so powerful in just being present and just being yourself and just being in the place. Now, one of the things that even with that, the owners of the place, they were so gracious and helped me through as I lost my mom to Alzheimer's. They made a spot for me to go through and make a donation for the Alzheimer's Association and kind of going through and just being a giving community and recognizing that we are all friends and we care for each other. Now, with that and that piece, it all leads up to one time that I say I was sitting there, and let's just say that it was a Friday that was more than an awful day. The kids were being the kids, and I was not ready to go. And so at that point, I'm sitting there, and I had to go through and have a couple extra drinks because the kids were being the kids. And as I'm sitting up at the bar, someone comes up and they literally are sitting next to me. And on that day, because I'm not in my own district, I feel that fortunately it's not a parent, not one of those kids' parents. They started asking questions about what it is that I do. And I say, I'm an educator. And I go and I say, like, oh, where do you work? And it's like, well, actually, I work in this district and my literally had a logo there. So he knew where I worked at that point. And he said, oh, you're a teacher. It's like, no, I'm actually the principal. And he's like, oh, how did that happen? I'm like, you, the principal? That's a good school district. And he felt comfortable enough in himself to say to me, sitting there, someone he had just met, how could you do that? Now, as I said, my mom, first lady of a church, Southern Baptist, she raised me right. So I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I said, I got the job because I applied. I was qualified, and I had the experience. And yeah, and I did. And at that point, I stepped away because again, my mama raised me right. What happened next was what makes this a very powerful story. Is all of the people in that bar that had come over when I was sitting there and typing papers and writing and doing teacher evaluations and grading papers and all of those times, they were so mad at me. And they were mad at me because I didn't tell them what was going on. And they were there to support me. And they were mad that they couldn't show that they had my back. And they couldn't show that that was unacceptable. And that they know for a fact that I had that job because of the work that I put into it and the love that I had for the kids that I serve and the community that I belong to. Now, now, the one thing that we have to go through and say that as we go through this piece, we really have to start looking and seeing something behind the labels, the appearances, and the recognition. There are a lot of people who are outsiders and they're taking a risk, but we also have to take that risk to step up and have the conversation that needs to be had. We need to recognize the human behind the labels and the outsider that's longing to fit in. These conversations have to rely on honesty and trust, and they have to go through, and each of us have to find that one moment when we have to go through and step out of our comfort zone, out of our safety net, and take that risk and be someone that they need in that moment. Now, when we look at that, we have to go through and recognize that those friends at that time that stood up for me in the bar and yelled at me, we all know the only people who yell at you like that are the people that love you. The only people that can do something like that and turn that around are the people that are your families. And I think that more than anything, as an outsider, it was important to recognize that I had found more than just my brother and sister in law, more than just my niece and nephew. I had found a family of the people in Madeira. Now we think about right now, and we know that we just lost George Wendt, who played Norm. And, as we know, that guy could walk into Cheers and be greeted by all of his friends and family and say, "Hey, Norm." And that reminds us all how deeply we each want that. We want to be seen. We want to belong. We want to walk into a room and we want to hear someone call out our name with warmth and love. Even in our divided times, even in our disparate communities, we have to recognize that even in the most unlikely of spaces, this kind of community is still and should be possible. Not because we agree on everything, but because who we show up to be and recognize that we all have one name at all, and that's to be a human. Thank you.